Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Connection, where industry expert Doug Plucknett interviews global leaders from the maintenance and reliability industry. Each week, new leaders will join us with insights and tips to help you grow in your career, and they'll share a good story or two while they're at it as well. The Leadership Connection is produced by the industry's leading networking and learning community, Mobius Connect. Doug, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time of day it might be that you're tuning into this podcast. On the Leadership Connection today, I have a very special guest, somebody I've been looking forward to talking to for quite some time. It's Thomas Boehm. Thomas, how you doing today?
Pretty good. It was a busy day.
And Tom, you normally go by just straight Tom, right?
Yeah, Tom. Yeah.
Very good. All right. So let me tell my audience a little bit about how we know one another. I met Tom through LinkedIn. And that was probably at least 5 years ago, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I would say around 2015, probably.
Right. So Tom is a circular knitting machine mechanic for Stanfield's up in, let me try the name of this town, Truro, Nova Scotia, Canada. Is that correct? Did I get that right, Tom?
You got it pretty good. Truro.
All right. So I have to say that Tom has one of the most unique profiles on LinkedIn. When you look it up, it says things like he's a chicken whisperer and circular knitting machine mechanic. You don't see anything about Tom being a great leader. And he's, in fact, when I first said, I'd like to have you on this podcast, he said, Doug, I don't think I'm a leader. I would certainly disagree with that. But anyway, let me get on with this introduction, and then you'll actually get to hear Tom talk. Tom's profile is not unique, but not only unique, but he has what I think is the most thought-provoking account on LinkedIn. His posts and articles that he writes are certainly thought-provoking. I would say I probably communicated with him more than I have anybody on LinkedIn over the past several years. As I said, I've been corresponding with him about 5 years now, and I'd have to say that I thoroughly enjoy the variety of topics that he covers as well. While most of his writings are about the knitting machines and his work and his life as a knitting machine mechanic, the enthusiasm and love that he has for his trade is quite infectious. It's quite clear that he's not only has a knack for maintaining these assets, but he has a love for the industry he works in. And you'll see that by the posts that he has about the history of Stanfield's and the knitting industry and the U.S. and Canada and around the world. If you want to know anything about the history of the company he works for, I would encourage you to connect with Tom on LinkedIn. Some of the things that he's also written about, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about these things. His life's growing up as the son of a minister. So, and the work ethic that his father instilled in him growing up. His life as a teacher in Japan, his family and the importance of family. It's quite clear that his family growing up and the family that he has made are quite important to Tom. And I think that's really a fantastic trait in people. He will often write about his walk with his dog. He used to go running with him, and he's told me today that his dog has aged a bit, so the runs aren't quite so good for him.
Maybe gotten too fat more than anything else.
So he talks about people who are up and coming in the knitting industry and how they got started. And those are some of the articles that I find absolutely incredible. He posted one a while back about a young lady that started her own company, and it just was intriguing to read about. And then another guy that is writing quite a bit, investing in the knitting industry in the U.S. It's really a business that we would all like to see come back. You know, when you look at the labels on our clothes that we get, and they always come from overseas. This used to have such a strong history in North America. It would be fantastic to see that come back. So going on about his posts, he also talks about how listening, learning, and patience are important when it comes to performing the precision type of work that he does. And lastly, the effects of dangling a carrot can have on your best employees. That was one of the posts that he and I went back and forth on several times. I have to tell you, Thom reminds me of my first 10 years working as a tradesperson and the struggle of becoming a leader in the industry. It's one of those things that you really have to sort through. And I think we'll talk about some of those things today. Thom, how are you doing? I'm sorry about the long introduction, but I think you're certainly a person that is worth that type of discussion.
I'm doing fine. No problem with the introduction.
So, as I've said, when I first mentioned this to you, you said, "Hey, I don't really think I'm a leader. I don't know that I'd be a great person on this." But I look at your post and I go, "Wow, this is a guy that I think every company that's in your business would love to have a Thom working for them. Somebody that's really engaged in how these machines work and what it takes to keep them running." And tell me a bit about what you do.
Well, I worked as a knitter for 10 years. And then as the older fellows retired, I took over. First, I took over the one man's alley. Then I took over the next two people that retired's alley. Now it's to the point where, well, there's me and two other guys, and we look after the room basically and run the machines. Now you run the machines and you look after the machines both at the same time. So
Right.
sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work, but you have to make it work one way or the other. So, but my average day is I'll go in and I'll check if there's any changeovers for machines to put different styles of fabric on. I'll get them done first if there was any, and then I'd start whatever machines up there's certain machines that are a little bit take more care than the other ones that I just prefer to run myself anyways. And so if they've got orders on them, I always run them myself. It's
So
easier.
not only are you a mechanic, you operate them as well, huh?
I operate them as well, yeah. And I mean,
All right.
as long as if I have to take a machine apart, I don't want to operate a machine. But
Right.
on an average day when there's nothing particularly going on, I'm more than happy to run a machine or run a few machines because I don't mind being at work when I've got things to do. I hate nothing more than being at work if I've got nothing to do.
There you go. So the Maytag repairman would not fit you, huh?
That wouldn't fit me.
There
Unless
you go.
I'm home.
And that's one of the things, as I say, you remind me of myself. When I worked at Kodak, we had day shift guys and the 3 shift guys, and the older fellas typically took that shift work.
Yeah.
And they'd always say they hated days because there was so much going on during the day shift, right? And then at night you'd get called in if they had a problem going on, and it'd be like, okay, so what are you guys doing? Why am I here?
Yeah.
Right? Well, we're waiting on 20 minutes from now. They're doing a product change, and we got to help them with the product change. And we can't be doing both. And okay, so and they'd say there's a lot of sitting around on the shift work. I'd be like, I don't think I ever want to do that too much. So, a bit about your life. Correct me if I'm wrong. You worked in Japan as a teacher for some time, correct?
Yeah, so I moved there when I just turned 20, and we lived there for 10 years. And I worked at the same company, well, for 9 years of my 10 years there. So
All right. And
I
what
taught
were you teaching?
English. I taught English, and I was the manager of foreign staff for the last 4 years there. So
Okay.
I had to find the new teachers and do the interviews, and
All right.
it was interesting.
So when you say we live there, who is with you?
My wife, and then my son was born in '96, so we'd been there for a few years by the time we were married in '92. So we lived there for 4 years when my son was born. So
All right. Very good. And then did you move from there to Canada?
yeah, we moved from there to Nova Scotia. We brought a cat and a dog with us, and we all moved to be near my parents here. So
All right.
Nova Scotia was not the original plan. We had been planning on moving to Ontario because at the time my father was a minister in a church in Northern Ontario, and that was sort of what we were looking forward to. But then in the meantime, Dad moved to Nova Scotia.
All
So
right.
we either would have to live near them or travel back and forth every other year to see each other's parents. So we decided to move to Nova Scotia.
All right. So you were born in the U.S., correct?
I was born in Michigan, yeah.
All right. That's what I thought. Remember, your dad was a preacher. You talk about him creating the sermon and things like that. So how in the world did you end up in the knitting industry? Tell me a bit about that.
Well, when we moved here in 2001, I'd been a teacher in Japan for 10 years. I never had a degree. When I moved to Japan, they asked me to give them a name of a college in Canada. I gave them a name, and they made up a degree for me, and I taught on that at the schools there for the 10 years I was there. But when I moved here, of course, that does me no good getting a job in Canada because I had no real qualifications as a teacher. So I had to look for factory work. I worked at a little supermarket near here when we first got here for 2 months for $6 an hour. Then I went to Stanfield one morning. I remember walking up thinking, wow, this would be a cool place to work, this old building. And I walked in. They said, "Do you come back tomorrow at 8:00? You can have an interview with the vice president at the time, Andrew Sears." And so I went back the next morning. I remember I was embarrassed because during the interview, I was so desperate to get a job. I could feel tears in the corner of my eyes during the interview. Not that I cried, but it was close to it.
Yeah.
And I remember he hired me on that day. I had the job. So it was piecework as a knitter, they call it, or a machine operator.
Sure. And that's there's certainly some elation that goes with that. I can relate back to that too. I could tell you, I asked my wife to marry me. I was had flunked out of school where we met. Right, they threw me out, and I was working for a friend of my brother's, cutting wood, basically. Clearing places for housing developments and expressways, and so running a chainsaw and a bucket loader and stuff like that, and not making much money, and uh, went and got a loan for the engagement ring, and telling my parents, and my mom was like, "Holy smokes, you don't even really have a job yet, right?" And I said, "I just know it's the right thing to do, you know." And then when I went and got the interview for Kodak, and it wasn't that I was hired that day, I had to take a test for an apprenticeship, and I just studied my tail off for it, and I knew when I took it that I aced it, right? And so the day that they did call me and offered me the job, it was, I can remember going down to see her afterwards and saying, "Hey, we're set for life. I mean, you're going to be a teacher," and she had gotten a job teaching,
Yeah.
and so it's a great thing to all of a sudden have that realization. Okay, we're going to be okay, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I was feeling pretty desperate at the time because looking for work's a hard thing.
Yes, it is.
That period, I always feel sorry for people who have to go look for work because it's very depressing. You put in so many applications and you have to be rejected so many times.
So moving from teaching to operating a piece of equipment and then maintaining them, uh, the maintenance side of that, operating is one thing. I mean, you certainly have to have some type of, and I hate calling it common sense because it's more than that, right? You have to understand how things mesh and how things work, and if you don't do that, you struggle all day long,
Yeah,
right? And I'm sure you've seen some examples of that. There's just some people that,
yeah,
man, right, outside of riding a bike, they can't accomplish much more than that, right?
yeah. You can usually tell
So
in a short period of time.
yeah, and then to go from that to maintaining those pieces of equipment, and that's, I encourage people to look at what you post, because you often post videos of it and you see all these moving parts, right? And how quickly they all mesh together. And if it's not perfect, man, that thing is not going to run. It's going to bind up and you're going to have a mess, right? Real quick. Right. So that transition, how did that happen?
Well, going from knitter to knitting machine mechanic went slower because, in all honesty, back in those days when it was piecework, the mechanics weren't real interested in assisting me because there was always a bit of a rivalry because mechanics were on time, the pieceworkers were on piecework, and there was always a little bit of a fear that the pieceworker might make more than the mechanic. So the mechanics sort of would like to try to see your machines down when possible. So after maybe 4 or 5 years, it got to the point where, aside from setting up a machine to a new style, all the small repairs and all the small day-to-day maintenance I did myself. because it was easier to do it myself than have to track someone down, ask them to do it for me, and get some silly joke put to me for for asking. So by the time my boss actually approached me to be a mechanic, I already was maybe halfway trained for the basics.
Right.
So, and I had no mechanical background, but I've always had, since I was a little kid, I've always been good with anything mechanical. I've always liked it. Clocks,
All right.
especially watches, have always fascinated me. So it was a quick study, and it was a good thing I was, because I had two mechanics mainly who trained me, and they're both good fellas, but they had their tricks up their sleeve, and the one was hoping to come back after he retired. So I had to always play up to their egos along with while I was
Sure.
being training. So
That's just called welcome to the apprenticeship, and that's just something that today, some folks struggle with. I won't say I was from the generation that the journeyman made carry his toolbox, but it was pretty close to that, right? It wasn't uncommon to see a journeyman throw a wrench in an apprentice, right? If things weren't going right.
yeah.
And
So
so things have changed quite a bit since then.
we'd have trouble getting the machine going, and if he didn't want me to know how to fix it, he'd say, break time. So I'd go for break, I'd come back, and the machine would be running perfectly, right?
Incredible how that works out.
Yeah.
So, looking at the other thing I wanted to tell people is, what does Stanfield's make? It's also a pretty unique industry.
I mean, originally it was an underwear factory. They really made the first big money making long underwear for the gold rush, the Klondike Gold Rush,
Right.
where the big money was first made. And after that, it went into just mostly underwear, long underwear, t-shirts, women's underwear.
So, and I get a charge out of it. In most cases, Tom refers to where he works as the crazy underwear plant, or crazy underwear factory. I can't remember which it is.
Yeah, crazy old underwear factory. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how big is Stanfield's? How many people are working there?
It's went down a lot since I started there. I would say probably 200 now. That's probably an overestimate.
Okay. And I'm always amazed at how much you know about the other businesses within your industry. Like that, you wrote a while back about a young lady that started up on her own. That she actually came out of one plant and started her own plant.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that takes courage in today's world, right? So, who is that person? And fill me in a little bit. How did you end up knowing who she was? And because I could tell you, I did see her response to what you wrote, and she was quite flattered about that.
Connie Huffa. So I met her here. I think she connected with me at some point and started commenting on my posts. And just like you, we started discussing things on the side of what's going on. And I like asking people questions if there's something I want to know about something. So off and on,
Sure.
we've exchanged messages. And then a few months ago, I decided it would be cool to spotlight different companies and people that I have found interesting within the textile industry on LinkedIn. So then Connie was one of the first ones I thought about. I never actually realized that she ran it with her husband till I did the research.
So you did,
writing about
right?
the community. So it was the first time for me to hear her personal history too. So it was interesting.
Yeah. So, I don't want to get too much into what goes on at your site. I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on leadership, because I know you don't see yourself that way, but in terms of the response to the people of what you write on LinkedIn, it's quite clear that you are, right? That there are other people in the industry that you work in that are reaching out and talking to you about things.
Yeah.
Right. And that has to be one of those pieces that's encouraging. And I told you, you remind me of myself. And that was one of the things that I struggled with early on was life isn't fair, right?
Yeah.
That you can come in and work 2 and 3 times more and do more than somebody else, right? And when that recognition doesn't come, or if it's not steady, right? Or if it doesn't bring any extra money with it, right? It's sometimes meaningless, right?
Yeah.
So in reaching out and connecting with other people, you'll find that lots of folks have been through that struggle, right?
Yeah.
And lots of folks have taken a step back and said, all right, where have I made my mistakes along the way, and what are the changes I need to make? So while you're reading a lot about the industry, I'm dying to ask you, are you reading any books about leadership?
No, not a whole lot. No, to be honest.
Yeah. And that's, go ahead.
I think if I was willing to leave Truro, then there would be opportunity for me. I've had job offers at quite a few places over the last 5 years from different mills in Canada and the US
Yeah.
who are interested in having me come work there, because knitting machine mechanics aren't easy to come by anymore either, especially
Right.
ones that enjoy working with the machines. But I get my mom's here and she's old, and I'm not going to leave as long as she's alive. And even when she's gone, I don't know. My wife settled here. We've settled here. The cost of living is low. Maybe if the factory closed, I would consider it, because I've got so much invested now in what I've learned that maybe then the temptation to leave and go somewhere else where I could do similar work would be strong. Just depends
Right.
how old I am when the factory closes, or if it closes.
And how old are you today when it closes? Let's hope that it doesn't.
Yeah, let's hope that it doesn't. I'm 49.
All right. And I will say they're doing their best to try to stick with the industry. It's quite clear of that it's very competitive business, and it's one of those things that from my point of view, I had no idea who your company was until I knew who you were. Right. So what's that tell you about advertising?
Yeah, well.
Okay.
So my son keeps telling me, why don't you apply for some positions in social media marketing? It doesn't matter.
And that's a strong thing, right?
You can't do anything without a piece of paper these days.
So back to leadership, and when we get done with this, I'll have a couple things that I'll push your way in terms of things I think you might want to read that made a difference on who I am today. Right. Saying out loud, I took a course from a guy named Dr. Aubrey Daniels on performance management, and it was really about how to interact with people and get the most out of people. Right. And in reality, it impacts yourself more than it does others. But it helped me understand what's the motivating thing for people. Right. What motivates some people to do less? What motivates some people to do more? Right. And how do I make changes to that? So it was an interesting process that I went through, and then I also took the Dale Carnegie course. That's not what got me into doing the social media thing initially. But I told you I went to school and met my wife. I was doing communication, so I did have a little bit of time in front of a microphone, but not much. So your machines, Thom. And I told you that I wasn't going to stick to that script, so you're not remembering any of it. So I'm going to just go through my own interview. How old are they?
Well, I'm trying to think. Like, no, I don't run the course machines, but I would say the course machines are the oldest, and they're probably around 50 years old, I'd think, by now at least.
Okay.
And my oldest Monarch knitting machine, which is one that I had just the other day, I posted a video of, that would probably be 40 years old, I would say.
Right.
Just off the cuff.
All right. The drives on them, are they variable speed drives, or are they?
The old Monarch just has a clutch system on it. You flip it up and it turns off. You flip the clutch down and it catches and it starts turning. Now, the newer ones all have computer drives on them with variable speed that you can adjust, but it just depends a lot on the individual machine and the age of it.
And it looks like that most of them operate off a cam system that makes everything go up and down and is it spinning, right? So in terms of those, what type of maintenance are you typically doing most of? Is it PM type stuff, time based, or are you doing condition monitoring?
We have no system in place for me
Oh,
at all. I do it as I need it. My current manager now, who manages laundry, knitting, and dye house, he asks me for my book every couple of months, and then I suppose he inputs into a computer what I've done. But other than that, there's no control on it. I have a good memory, so I trust myself. And like the machines that run every day, I oil them every 2 days. I never let the oilers go down because just like a gas tank, the lint to the bottom of the tank, and I don't like the oilers to go down. So the machines that are running every day, they're fine. They get their maintenance every day. But some of the machines run maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years. The other day I started up a machine that hadn't run since 2016, 2017. So machine that's sitting there, usually I have the yarn tied off on it and it won't get much, really any maintenance. Maybe I might squirt some oil over the needles once in a while, but if it's just sitting there. The other ones, I just keep my eyes on them.
interesting. So, and that was my thought process, is they were probably because they're so mechanical, very PM oriented. So you would have preventive maintenance that was either time based or based on hours, in terms of, all right, when do we need to replace that cam? How do we need to replace the rollers and needles and so on, right?
Now the needles, we do have a book that I write in, but again, I know not everybody's writing in it because I re-needled a machine a month ago, I think. And if I went by the book, it hadn't been re-needled in 15 years. And I'm 100% positive that machine's been re-needled, but it wasn't traditionally my alley. So somebody had re-needled it and just never wrote it in the book. So.
All right. So by guesstimate, how often would you say you re-needle a machine? And how many needles are in one?
Well, I'll use the ones we make. We make a 2-layer garment for LL Bean, and those are the 2 machines that run always when there's yarn. Now we haven't been able to get yarn lately, but when there's yarn, those machines have been running steady since I started working there, and they're 2 30-inch machines. They'd have 2 sets of around 1,200 needles, 1,280 needles maybe each, 1,280 in the dial, and then 1,280 in the cylinder. And if in a normal year where they ran every day for 2 or 3 shifts, I would re-needle them once a year and maybe clean them somewhere in between. If I have a slow day, sometimes I'll pull off all the blocks and clean the dirt out of the blocks and put the blocks back on. But clean and re-needle once a year.
Interesting stuff. So I told you at some point I'm going to come up and visit the Crazy Underwear Factory. I look forward to doing that now that we have a border open, but I will say it will probably be in nicer weather.
Yeah.
Right. And I've also been reading recently about, we all have a gift. And I think it took me 20 years to figure out what my gift was. And then I've been doing that gift for over 20. And the advice of this person was, before you decide to just do nothing, start giving it away. So I'd be more than happy to go up and talk with your bosses and give them some advice on what I think a good maintenance plan might be, right? And that's usually based on, how does a good maintenance plan come about? By talking with your people.
Yeah, that would be a great.
Right? They know, right? The people know. It's really put those words to paper and developing that. So, Thom, it has been very interesting, as I expected, to talk to you today. How are things with your family, by the way?
Everybody's fine. My son just finished his master's degree.
All right.
Took it at the University of Toronto from our basement, and he just finished it. So now he's busy looking for work. He just had it today. So
A master's in what?
anthropology.
Oh, wow.
And he applied at a bank, and the other one's a financial institution too. I guess they study us to see our spending habits and our banking habits.
All right. So, well, as I said, it's been nice talking to you, Thom. I look forward to speaking again sometime in the near future.
Sounds good.
And as I said, I'll correspond with you and a couple of recommendations, things I think you might find interesting to read. By the way, folks, Thom also does, he dabbles in writing on the side. So that's another thing that we have in common. We're both dabble with a little bit of fiction work, which is, it's one of the things I find to be relaxing. So
yeah, it's a new experience, that is, but
yeah. And I'll also tell you, Thom, that my friends from high school, when they find that out, they're like, first it's you published 2 books. What? Who? You did? What, are you kidding me? Right. And then I tell them, yeah, I write all the time. So
I hated writing in high school.
same here. Well, it's been good to talk to you, Thom.
Really good to meet you.
All right. Have a great day, my friend.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Leadership Connection. We will see you back for another episode next week. In between, we hope to see you in the Mobius Connect community where you can meet Doug and share with other industry professionals at mobiusconnect.com. We'll see you there.